Arcane is a show built on misunderstandings, often synonymous with failures. Season 1 was all about misunderstandings. Powder thinks Vi hates her and abandons her, Heimerdinger fails to understand humans, and Jace and Victor let their ambitions get the better of them. Every problem in Arcane was the byproduct of some sort of misunderstanding. Season 2 comes around, and now, with Act 2, it's shifted. Now it's all about understanding and redemption. Victor understands it now, Jace understands it now, Jinx understands it now, and now that they do, they have to set things right. The 3 episodes that make up Act 2 in this season could probably be used to create a dozen video essays on their own. So today, instead of getting too rambly, I'm gonna try and focus mostly on the topic of parallels in Arcane by going through each episode and stopping at key scenes to show off the themes and story beats that Fortiche worked into their scripts, as well as showcasing how they've chosen to represent those themes through various writing and filmmaking techniques. Before anything else, let's catch ourselves up with where we are in the story. Coming as no big surprise to anyone who watched Act 1, Act 2 picks up in a Piltover now run under Caitlyn's martial law. While Zaun, on the other hand, is spiritually run by Jinx after she's been deified by the population. As we'll come to discuss, Arcane is obsessed with parallels, and this is one of them for Act 2. How Caitlyn and Jinx handle responsibility, and what it means for each of them. For Caitlyn, her rise to power has been her reaching for absolute control in the mess of everything that's happened recently. Jinx's attack on the council building, her mother's subsequent death, Vi getting in the way of her shot, all of these things have been the result of what she feels is a lack of control. All actions that if only she could have manipulated one more piece of the puzzle, it all could have been avoided. If only she took the shot. If only she wasn't tied up. Her regime is a manifestation of her guilt and frustration, made in the hopes that with absolute power, she can make sure nothing ever goes wrong again. Jinx has also had a complicated relationship with control throughout her life. As Powder, she has often been denied autonomy by everyone around her. They mostly meant well, but nonetheless it happened.
I need you to sit this one out, Powder.
What?
You're not coming.
I'm not afraid.
And the one time she mustered the courage to stand up and take action, she jinxed it. And now, as we know her in the present, as Jinx, we can observe that she's come to reinforce that idea that nothing good can come of her presence in just about anything.
Whether I'm pulling the pin or not, everyone who gets close to me dies.
And as a result, she's become this carefree, chaotic Harley Quinn of a character. On the surface, we see a crazed maniac, and to some degree, this is true. But if you truly believe that only bad things will happen to those that you love, that you're a Jinx, then maybe the hardest thing to do is to care. We'll see Jinx struggle with this idea of leadership and responsibility as the act progresses, primarily through her relationship with Isha, as well as Zaun and the Jinxers. To recap, both Caitlyn and Jinx deal with their trauma by trying to minimize what they believe to be the cause. Caitlyn achieves this through control, and Jinx achieves this through detachment. Keep those ideas in the back of your mind as we continue. Fast forward a few minutes and we're given a scene that tells us everything we need to know about where we stand with Caitlyn and therefore where we can expect her story to go. She's approached by Ambessa, who comes with the hopes that she'll take advantage of the recent noise in Zaun and hone in on Jinx, to which Caitlyn remains hesitant. The entirety of that conversation happens in just under 2 minutes, and in that time, we're given no less than 6 signs that Caitlyn doesn't quite see eye to eye with Ambessa. Caitlyn verbally signals her disagreements.
Was it for my encouragement that your man Rictus was instigating violence? The blade cuts both ways.
Arrests require cause. Why is peace always the justification for violence?
But Arcane, being the ever so subtle show that it is, doesn't want us to just hear information, it wants us to feel it too. And that's how we end up with the composition like this, where Caitlyn and Ambessa are literally separated by this line in the curtains. They may be working together, but they're not on the same side. Both parties are too smart and know that this isn't a team built on trust, but rather convenience. They have a similar objective, but each side sees it in a different, subtle way. Caitlyn believes that her control will prevent further tragedy. while Mbessa believes that further tragedy is the price of more control. There is a moment where Mbessa attempts to cross this line, give Caitlin words that she thinks that she'll want to hear, but we see that this isn't enough, and ultimately, this retreat back to her side of the room is a subtle sign to the viewer that these two will not be on the same side by the end of the story. Even after this small concession, Mbessa doesn't give up on appealing to Caitlin's soft heart, and ultimately tells her that the choice to catch Jinx, to end the suffering that she's endured, is hers.
It's tiring. Gods, I know it's tiring. But you will never rest knowing that she's out there.
But look again at how this is framed. Caitlin is trapped in this tiny pocket of the frame, dominated by Mbessa's presence. Is it really her choice? Sure, Caitlin could call off the witch hunt, but then what? She said herself in Act 1 that the enforcers weren't ready for the heat, and throughout Act 2 we see mainly Noxian soldiers at her disposal. Literally, yes, it's her choice. But, given the circumstances, what choice does she really have? Let's move on.
But this fantasy you've been living out here, it's not gonna last forever.
Ooh, foreshadowing. Okay, pause. In a show as bombastic as Arcane, it can be easy to gloss over the quiet moments. But I think that this brief transition that plays before the rally at Vander's statue demonstrates such an impressive amount of world building without a single spoken word that I have to talk about it. So for starters, Caitlin and this bat dude, I think his name is Scar, both place candles at the memorials for their respective fallen. Caitlin at this giant statue of the dead councilman, and Scar at the mural in the Firelight's hideout. However, while these two scenes mirror one another, they're also opposites to each other. In Piltover, we have this giant statue of 3 councilmen, 3 high-ranking, wealthy, powerful individuals. The statue is carved with what I'm sure is perfect craftsmanship and expensive materials. It reflects the values of Piltover to a T. It's gaudy, it's gigantic, and it's displayed in public as a constant reminder. You might say that it's a reminder of a recent tragedy, which is true, but it's also a reminder of who's actually important in Piltover. You see these guys here? Now they're the guys who get a statue when they die. Not old Fred down the street if he was caught in the crossfire. Piltover only functions if the powerful retain their control over the general populace. And a giant reminder of these dead councilmen who still tower over you even in the afterlife is a good way to hammer that idea home. Move over to Zaun, and we have this huge mural painted on the trees in the Firelight's hideout. And pretty much everything besides the size is the complete opposite of Piltover's statue. It's handmade, it's not entirely hidden, but it isn't clearly meant to be a public exhibit either. And there's a lot of people on it. Everything about Zaun always comes back around to community. This mural has been added to over the years as people lose loved ones, and it's clearly very personal the way it's hand-painted. Even now, at this seemingly random moment, there are 10 people gathered around to respect the dead. You can tell everyone on this mural was important, not just to one person, but to many. For the sake of the show, our main cast may be a bit bigger and more detailed, but you can clearly see other depictions of loved ones drawn all about. And I think it's safe to say that this isn't a mural that was made for one person and their grief, but it's truly a monument of respect to those who have mattered to the people of Zaun. I also didn't know where to add this in, but I think it's really important that this mural lives on a tree and not a slab of rock. There's real life that lives within it.
I knew this was the place. If a single seed can make it down here, so could we.
Anyway, if we circle back to the status quo, Piltover is being run by a single powerful dictator, and Zaun is banding together at political rallies. Guess who was at their memorial all alone? Well, I guess Maddie was there too, but we all know that the only reason she was there was for the lesbian grief sex. Seriously though, who actually cared about any of these people? Caitlin obviously cares about her mom, but is anyone in the show, or even in real life, mourning the loss of Rubik's Cube and Clanker? No, I don't think so. This statue is not made in honor of those who have shaped the nation of Piltover for the better. but for those who are rich and powerful. Let's wrap up the end of episode 4 by visiting Stillwater really quickly. Over in Zaun, we have a lot going on in the prison. At this point, Jinx and Sevika have infiltrated Stillwater to free the Jinxers who were arrested at the rally earlier in the episode. This includes Isha. The Jinxers are a group of rebels who worship Jinx as a symbol of said rebellion against Topside, taking inspiration from her actions in episode 9 and 12. For the purposes of our breakdown, the Jinxers are relevant as they serve as an important figure in Jinx's character development. In this scene, after being freed from their cells, the Jinxers show their appreciation to Jinx with this hand-on-the-shoulder gesture as they walk past her. Jinx is so used to being manipulated that when she receives all this positive attention with no expectation of something in return, she doesn't know what to do. It's completely foreign to her. And this moment will ultimately help her come to the understanding that happiness may be possible for her. Lastly, we have the standoff between Jinx and Warwick. There's probably an entire thesis paper that could be written about Jinx's suicidal tendencies, but in Act 2 specifically, Jinx seems to have a new lease on life. Isha has really given her something to live for, and you can see that she's noticeably a different person. Her hideout is more colorful, she's more cheerful, more mature. She's very quickly taken to a caretaker role with Isha. That all being said, she's still Jinx. And I think her big fat hero moment is another suicide attempt. Or something resembling one anyway. Maybe more like a suicide mission. Jinx isn't using this moment as an opportunity to die, but for once, she's charging headfirst into hell, not for herself, but for someone else. The part that really does a lot of heavy lifting for her characterization here is when she cuts off Sevika saying,
Big fat hero.
I have to imagine that this is Jinx in her nearly final moments thinking of Isha over herself. If Sevika had been able to finish her sentence and say, "You really are a moron, psychopath, lunatic, whatever," that could possibly have been the last way that Isha ever heard someone refer to Jinx. And so Jinx cuts her off, calling herself a big fat hero. Which is in character, something that Jinx probably would have said regardless. But I also think that this is her way of trying to fix her legacy. That perhaps, at least in the eyes of Isha, she can be remembered as someone more than just a Jinx.
Why did you leave me?
Because you're a Jinx! Do you hear me? Milo was right!
I need you, please.
Vi's bender in the fighting pits is such an interesting piece of characterization, as the choice of coping mechanism / vice that Fortiche has chosen to write for her perfectly reflects how Vi and Jinx have swapped places in this act. In my previous video on Act 1, I talked a lot about power dynamics and how characters shift up and down through them. And a similar thing is happening here. As we touched upon before, Jinx has taken on a mother or big sister role to Isha. And in that process, we've seen a lot of Vi come out in her. She's protective and supportive, but also shows that same caution towards Isha's more dangerous ambitions.
You could have warned me.
Fat chance. About what?
Your stunt at the checkpoint.
No idea what you're babbling about.
That wasn't you?
Vi, on the other hand, now that she's crashing out, is choosing to display those difficulties in the same ways that Jinx used to. Namely, pushing people away, substance use, and having an identity crisis. When we take a look at all the times Jinx and Powder came and went throughout the show, we can see that Jinx was a defense mechanism for Powder. Powder was a weak, damaged, detrimental person. Someone who existed at the root of all her own downfalls. On the other hand, Jinx was the strong embodiment of those same characteristics. She was carefree, confident, and self-sufficient. Jinx is who Powder wants to be, and eventually who she would become when she kills Powder.
Powder, it's okay.
Stop calling me that. It's Jinx now. Powder fell down a well.
Now, of course, the reality of who Jinx or Powder really is somewhere in the middle. Applying this framework to Vi, we see that after her crash out with Caitlyn, Vi gets herself a new look, all while she turns her big stupid brute hands into something useful by winning prize money at the pits. She's running away just like Powder once did, trying to make herself into someone who doesn't care that she's alone. Who cares that I couldn't save Powder? Who cares that I lost Vander? Who cares that Caitlyn doesn't want me? Emo pit fighter Vi doesn't care. And it's easier to be her than it is to be Violet. There's an aspect of this coping mechanism worth mentioning, and it's that while both Vi and Jinx are running away from their problems, they're also punishing themselves at the same time. Strong negative emotions are often illogical, and in this case, as true as it is that Jinx or Emo Vi are an escape from reality, they're also vehicles for self-harm. It's equal parts of, everyone around me gets hurt, so I should be alone, as it is, I deserve to be alone. There's a big theme in Arcane that shows itself more explicitly in this episode, and that's the idea of paths. The paths we choose to take in living our lives and where those paths can lead us. Generally speaking, it's Victor who interacts with this theme the most explicitly, but it is explored throughout the show's full cast. Like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, Arcane loves to place extra special emphasis on particular moments that shape the lives of the characters in the show. And later on, they even go so far as to show us an entire alternate universe of what could have been. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, Vi and Jinx are in this tunnel, right? And the tunnel is filled with different paths that lead who knows where. It's a pretty clear metaphor for life. Vi and Jinx are two people who have a hard time not living in the past. And while Season 1 asked us to consider how key moments in our lives can shape who we become, Season 2 asks us whether or not those moments define us forever. Inside the caves, we get our answer, as both Vi and Jinx have somehow wound up on the paths that led them to embody the lives of the other. Vi has been spiraling into depressive, self-destructive tendencies, while Jinx has found herself becoming someone's protector. For once, they actually understand one another, and it's through that understanding that the two can finally begin to mend a very broken history. All that's happened can't be undone, but as painful as the process may be, things can be better. I'm sure that Vi and Jinx relived the day that Vander died in their heads more than any other moment in their lives, which is why I think it's poetic that only once they finally resolve to reunite and live through that pain together, that, if only for a moment, they're allowed to return to how things once were.
What are you waiting for? He's your dad, too.
Anyway, y'all like whack-a-mole? Let's start discussing episode 6 by addressing the elephant with a hammer in the room. Brewing in the background for a while has been yet another parallel that makes a grand re-entrance in episode 6. In case it's been a while since you've seen the show, Jace and Victor's partnership has one very important hitch that you need to know about. When it comes to Hextech, Jace is of the mind that if Hextech is ever going to be handled safely, and be granted the funding it needs to progress, it needs to be legitimized through existing institutions. He achieves this primarily through Piltover's integration of the Hex Gates and the military's use of Hextech weaponry. In Victor's eyes, Hextech presents itself as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that has the real potential to shape lives for the better. Problem is, Victor doesn't have the luxury of time, and believes that while Jace is rubbing elbows with bigwigs, real people are suffering, including himself. Every delay that Jace tolerates in the name of legitimacy is more time lost that Victor doesn't have to give. Jace's role as a celebrity politician, combined with his deep trust in Victor as a scientist, blinded him to the reality of Victor's desperation. All the while, Victor sees Jace's political responsibilities not as a necessary step in their work, but as indulgence for a man obsessed with optics over ethics. That leads us to episode 6, which is really interesting because unlike Vi, Jinx, or Caitlyn, Jace and Victor don't go through any type of shift in their core beliefs. In fact, their respective experiences with the Arcane only reinforce them. So what has changed? Jace, who was once driven to and by the approval of others, is now forced into action. Victor's desperation makes sense to him now. There are no councils, no regulations, no discussion that will stop him. The Arcane must be ended. Looking at Victor pre-Arcane, we have to realize that as a Zaunite, he was never really accepted by the Academy without Jace. Jace was really the only reason Victor was allowed to work on Hextech to begin with, let alone be respected by anyone to any degree. This isn't to say that he didn't care about Jace.
It was affection that held us together.
But Victor did pretty much leave as soon as he didn't need him anymore. Now that he's arcanified, Victor pretty quickly becomes this public-facing, absolutist figure as leader of his own cult. And just as quickly, he begins to work in the way that he's always wanted, without waiting for the lagging approval of others. This isn't to say that he doesn't understand why Jace did what he did, but rather, Victor has likely come to a very clear understanding and subsequent rejection of the very premise behind delaying real change. And this is the tragedy of Episode 6. For once, all the big players in Arcane are not acting off of a tragic misunderstanding, but rather a devastating awareness. They understand the stakes, they know what's coming, but they still can't stop it. The forces at play were set into motion too long ago. And, unfortunately, the glorious evolution does not concern itself with the opinions of very handsome, angry white boys. With Season 2's scope becoming so large at times, it's easy to forget that the core of everything is the socio-economic struggle between Piltover and Zaun. The focus has been much tighter on the characters this season, but luckily for Fortiche, we have two perfect stand-ins to represent each of the cities in Caitlyn and Jinx. Let's catch back up on the events of this episode through the lens of Caitlyn and Jinx specifically. By the end of this episode, Caitlyn comes to a realization that maybe she's gone a little too far, and begins to right her wrongs by teaming up with Vi and the others against Ambessa. She definitely feels the weight of responsibility in letting things get this bad, but ultimately, she herself is largely unaffected by the worst of the consequences. Jinx, on the other hand, has spent much of Season 2 bonding with Isha, and more recently, reconciling with Vi. She's learning to open herself up and become vulnerable, which only hurts more by the end of the episode when we lose Isha to the battle against Ambessa's army. If we look at all this from a macro lens, both are struggling through a similar sense of powerlessness again, but in different ways, which is exactly where Piltover and Zaun come back into the picture. Caitlyn, and by extension Piltover, feels the weight of her decisions internally. This grief stems from the realization that a mistake has been made that can never be taken back. The actual mistake itself, though, is where Jinx and Zaun come into the picture, because although it was Caitlyn's leadership that caused the state of affairs we're in, Jinx, Isha, and Victor's commune are the ones who ultimately suffer the worst of its consequences. Piltover gets sent a timeout to reflect on what they've done, while Zaunites die in the streets. Arcane in general loves this framework, rarely having people who cause problems face the consequences themselves. When the council delays action, Zaun pays for it. When Victor becomes obsessed, Skye dies. When Jinx tries to help the group, everyone dies. All of these parallels lead to the same destination, a moment of clarity that comes too late to undo the past, but too early to ignore the oncoming storm. Looking back, it's tempting to think that if the characters knew what they do now, things could have turned out differently. And maybe they could have, but that isn't the point. Arcane doesn't sugarcoat the nature of an uncaring, unjust world. It doesn't propose the idea that a big heart can change the world. What it does present us with, however, is a thought. By the time we finally see things for how they really are, it may be too late to go back on old mistakes. But that doesn't mean it's too late to stop yourself from making new ones. Understanding doesn't grant us peace, but rather, it reveals to us just how much more there is to reckon with.
Knowledge is a paradox. The more one understands, the more one realizes the vastness of his ignorance.